Hi, everyone. My name is Madeline Brown, and I am one of the mentors here on AMP Honors Program.
I'm Riley Kuhn. I'm also one of the mentors in the AM program.
And we're here today because it is Healthcare Decision Day. The whole purpose is really to promote the conversation of advanced directives and end-of-life care planning and having those hard conversations about the end of life and death early on, whether it be with your family members, loved ones, healthcare providers, and integrating all of those people, those important players into that conversation and really promoting that conversation in the first place. And with that national holiday being today, Riley and I are here to discuss a book that we both ironically just read. And Riley will talk a little bit more about this book and its author.
Yeah, so the book, if you're curious, is called Being Mortal. And then it says the little like subtext is medicine and what matters in the end. So the whole book kind of thing, there it is. Actually, before I get into this, Maddie, I think, sent me out on like some quest to read this book called The Emperor of All Maladies. She let me borrow this book, and it's like a 500-page book it's like the biography of cancer. And I think her plan this whole time was to make me read that book so that she could read this book and then recommend this Being Mortal book to me. And this was on my list the whole time, but she was just, I don't know.
It was weird timing. I finished the book. I finished the book, I don't know, a week or two ago. And then I told Riley, I was like, hey, like, just so you know, he had reached out to me about this Healthcare Decision Day. And I didn't know what it was at first exactly. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I just read this book that literally talks about all of these kinds of ideas. Like, you have to read it. And Riley was like, oh my gosh, it's actually sitting on my bed. Like right now, I was going to read it next.
It was my next book.
It was weird timing, really weird timing.
Like, so more on the author. Atul Gawande is his name. He has become my role model now at this point. But so a little background on him. He's the son of two physicians that are both from India, and they got jobs in America. They moved to Athens, Ohio, and that's where he grew up. He was born in New York, but they moved to Athens. He went to Stanford for his undergraduate, his Bachelor of Science. He attended Harvard Medical School, of course. And then he now practices as a general/endocrine surgeon. So primarily the endocrine part is mostly like thyroid, I think, is most of what his endocrine surgeries are. He also has his master's in public health, and he works for Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. So with that, I will start our discussion asking Maddie a question. What do you think the author means when he says that we've medicalized mortality? Do you agree? Why do you think that has happened in our culture? And how can we shift to a more humane, compassionate approach to mortality?
Very good question. And just so you know, for the readers' sake, all of these discussion questions are in the back of the book. And that's where Riley and I basically pulled all of these questions from and kind of built our entire book talk around. So
yeah, we're not that creative.
Yeah. So to start, I'm actually going to read a few different little favorite quotes from the book that really, I think, put things into perspective and answer from Dr. Gawande's perspective and knowledge. And with that, like, it's super eye-opening, especially because Riley and I are both about to begin medical school this upcoming summer in a few months. And having this knowledge and being equipped with this background in the first place, I think not only just, you know, an upcoming future medical student, a future healthcare provider, but any person in society can really benefit from reading this book, in my mind. It's really geared for anyone, and there's a lot of takeaways. So with that, we start off here with, I learned about a lot of things in medical school, but mortality wasn't one of them. The way we saw it and the way our professors saw it, the purpose of medical schooling was to teach how to save lives, not how to tend to their demise. Even under dire circumstances, medicine had always pulled patients through. The shock to me, therefore, was seeing medicine not pull people through. I knew theoretically that my patients could die, of course, but every actual instance seemed like a violation, as if the rules I thought we were playing by were broken. I don't know what game I thought this was, but in it, we always won. So, to start, I think that really answers Riley's question about the medicalization um, of death and dying in our society and our culture, just because, I mean, I think it really speaks to how far medicine and public health advancements have come in recent years, and really throughout history. It's always been advancements, and that is incredible. Like, all props to that. And that's why we've been able to, fix so many things and prolong life and sustain quality of life. But what this book really discusses, and the whole point of National Healthcare Decision Day 2, is to really talk about when the big question is, like, when does that fixing go too far? When does that fixing, especially toward the end of life, compromise quality of life at the end of life? And I think that's kind of the question that's been left unaddressed in making these advancements, is like, those questions are, big important questions, and when is fixing taken too far? And I want to make sure I hit all of my points here.
Definitely.
Not only that, like, I think it also speaks to the fact that, like, death is right now looked at as more so as a medical problem, as being more than it is a natural process. Like, death is something that inevitably we will all come to. That is our fate at the end of our lives. And it's great that we can, like I said, prolong life, but at what extent do we want to do that where it jeopardizes quality of life, and what's really important to someone at the end of their lives? And to address the second part of that question, like, how can we shift to a more humane, compassionate approach to mortality? I think Atul says it best, so I'm going to quote him one more time here. I know I had a time. I'm like, there's no way I can put this into my own words, but okay, here we go. People die only once. They have no experience to draw on. They need doctors and nurses who are willing to have the hard discussions and say what they have seen, who will help people prepare for what is to come and escape a warehoused oblivion that few really want. Over and over, we in medicine inflict deep gouges at the end of people's lives and then stand oblivious to the harm done. So I think that in itself really just goes to show that not only as future healthcare providers, but any healthcare provider that's currently working, and then especially for our upcoming generation that's coming through the pipeline, I think it's really our responsibility to create a new normal, and having these conversations early about advanced directives, and approaching our parents and being like, what do you want at the end of your life? If you're faced with this choice and this choice, and I mean, obviously it might not be that clean cut. I'm making this sound way easier than it really is in reality, because it is, I'm sure, a very difficult conversation to have. And there's a lot of variables that can change along the way, but, making sure to know what your parents want at the end of their lives, your grandparents, yourself. So when, you have a family someday, that you can prepare accordingly. And I think in the long run, that takes a lot of pain away from the situation, a lot of grief away, because it allows for, that person who is going on to pass to end their life on their terms, and in their way of happiness, in a sense. So, long-winded answer, but a very loaded question.
Oh no, they will all be long-winded, I promise.
Yes. And I mean, now, Riley, I will ask you the same question, so I'll just repeat it here, because that was a lot in between. But
Yeah.
what do you think the author means when he says that we've medicalized mortality? Do you agree? And why do you think that has happened in our culture? How can we shift to a more humane, compassionate approach to mortality?
So I do agree. As I will a lot with Atul. He is a he's a genius, to put it politely. But so, and this is kind of just a side point, but as soon as I read this question, and maybe this is just like me being on Twitter too much these days, but I immediately thought of the and I don't even know, you might not even know what I'm talking about, but this Phil Swift, it's a meme, it's a flex tape meme, and it's Phil Swift is like the infomercial guy, and it's like this big tub of water, and it's like leaking water out of this big hole. And for this flex tape, like this advertisement, he takes this flex tape and just like slaps it on the big like tub of water that's just spilling, and it like stops the spill immediately. But the meme like has like a hole it like cuts a hole in his hand, like photoshops it, and the water like keeps going out of the spout.
Mm.
And so like that's how I kind of think about a lot of the like medications, especially towards the end of life. Like I feel like they're kind of just like band-aids on top of like major wounds in a way. Like it's just kind of something that the doctor and the patient kind of need for their like either for their ease of conscience or whatever it is, but it's like feeling like they're doing something to help the cause kind of, rather than kind of sitting back and um like readdressing like kind of where we're at and just accepting kind of the realist or the reality of our mortality, I guess. Because like you said, we all do die and we all die once. So none of us have experience with it, and none of us, a lot of us at least, don't want to face that because it's a scary thing. None of us know what it's like. But I think there comes a point where we do need to kind of address like this could be it, or if this time comes, like what is it that we want to achieve with the time that we have left, kind of. And so a quote from page 8, he said, "You become a doctor for what you imagine to be the satisfaction of the work, and that turns out to be the satisfaction of competence. It is a deep satisfaction, very much like the one that a carpenter experiences in restoring a fragile antique chest, or that a science teacher experiences when bringing a fifth grader to that sudden mind-shifting recognition of what atoms are. It comes partly from being helpful to others, but it also comes from being technically skilled and able to solve difficult, intricate problems. Your competence gives you a secure sense of identity. For a clinician, therefore, nothing is more threatening to who you think you are than a patient with a problem you cannot solve." So this one kind of spoke to me just with the medicalization part of it. They don't want, like, a lot of doctors probably get to this point where like they know that their patient is probably coming to an end, but they see their patient dying as them failing kind of at their job, because their job and what it's kind of like the epitome of a doctor is to keep you alive, kind of. And even when it's kind of inevitable, it gets like brushed under the rug that it is like this will happen to everybody eventually. And so they might throw a medication on to feel like they're doing something, when in reality it might not be the best, I guess, for that patient.
So I have a question for you.
Oh geez, I gotta
Okay.
talk again.
Okay. Often medical treatments do not work, yet our society seems to favor attempts to fix health problems, no matter the odds of their success. Dr. Gawande quotes statistics that show 25% of Medicare spending goes to the 5% of patients in their last stages of life. Why do you think it's so difficult for doctors and or families to refuse or curtail treatment? How should priorities be set?
Okay, so this is kind of tying into my last
What you
answer,
just
so I'm
said.
going to
Yeah.
try to keep it a little bit shorter, just because I know that we have a time constriction. Okay, so this is another quote, just a short quote from Overkill, that 2015 article that he wrote for the New Yorker. He said, "As a doctor, I am far more concerned about doing too little than doing too much." And so I think this kind of this goes to explain kind of the overdiagnosis part of it. Like, you as a doctor, you don't want to be that, like, you kind of remember your misses probably a lot more than you remember like the times where you ordered a CT and it was unremarkable. But if you, let's say you don't order a CT because you think nothing of it, and then they come back a couple months later and they have like some kind of cervical cancer or something, and you would have found it on that CT, but because you didn't do it for some reason, maybe because your last 10 CTs weren't like remarkable, and you just said like, maybe this isn't the best, maybe I'm exposing them to radiation that they don't need and stuff like that. That's the one that you remember, and that's the one that sticks with you, because 3 months of cervical cancer could be the difference between like living for 5-10 more years and like dying within a year, that kind of thing. So I think that, like, that's to go back against my overdiagnosis point. Like, we're overdiagnosing for a reason, because we have the ability to find things that we didn't before, and I think that's something to think about too, I guess. So this is more kind of my thoughts, but everyone sees like the success stories of like beating cancer, like they go into remission or they exceed the life expectancy, I guess. And so that kind of implies that dying of cancer is like failing. And I think that this kind of perspective kind of needs a reset, I guess. Just because like, and this is what about a lot of being mortal is about, is just kind of accepting your mortality. And he so he goes about this, or he talks about this when he's talking about his father, who died of a cancer in his neck, I believe. Am I correct in that? It was
Yes.
something in his,
His
yeah.
spine. Yep. His spine.
He said, when I was a child, the lessons my father taught me had been about perseverance, never to accept limitations that stood in my way. As an adult, watching him in his final years, I also saw how to come to terms with limits that couldn't simply be washed away. When to shift from pushing against limits to making the best of them is not often readily apparent. But it is clear that there are times when the cost of pushing exceeds its value. Helping my father through the struggle to define that moment was simultaneously among the most painful and the most privileged experiences of my life. So here he talks, and this is kind of what this whole healthcare decision day is about, is just defining what it is that people want at the end of their life. Like, what are their priorities? Whether it be, I think Atul mentioned in the book, like one patient just wanted to be able to eat ice cream and watch football games.
Yep.
And if that's what it is, then if that's what does it for you, then so be it. And like, we'll do our best to be able to give you that opportunity late in life. And like I think for Atul's dad, he wanted to be able to like interact with people and not be quadriplegic. That was a big thing with him. He didn't want to be a quadriplegic because he didn't think that was a fulfilling life for him. So their whole goal was to not allow, or to not let him get to the point of quadriplegia, because Atul's father would rather be dead, he said, than be quadriplegic. So I think just identifying the points that we want in the last bit of our life is very important. And I think that's kind of what this healthcare decision day is all about. Okay, your question
Okay.
is, doctors and probably the rest of us tend to define themselves by their successes, not their failures. Is this true in your life, at work, in your family, at whatever skills you have? Should we define ourselves by our failures? Do you know people who define themselves by their failures? Are they fun to be with? And that's in parentheses. How can doctors and the rest of us strike a balance? That's like 4 questions. So
Okay. I have it here too, so don't worry. I can always refer
yes.
back to it. But I think, okay, first of all, in terms of like, I look at my own life through my own lens, and I think it's really easy to think about the good times and think about your successes. Like, I look back on my athletic career. I look back on my like state volleyball tournament, and, or getting that first job, or getting, that leadership position that I really wanted, that I didn't think I would get. Getting accepted to literally like my dream medical school, like
Yes.
that is like, that feeling too. Like, it's just one of those things that, like, you think about the successes and you're just like, wow, like that was so incredible. But I think the first time that I was really prompted to think about failures and regrets in my life was during the medical school application process and essay writing. And I remember at one point I was literally writing one of those essays where I had to like break things down and talk about one of my regrets. It wasn't necessarily a failure, but I still look at it. I think sometimes those can be used hand in hand. And I remember like just being so emotional and so vulnerable in what I was writing. And then that essay came up during my interview day. And I remember just being there, sitting in my interview and being like, I did everything I could to not get emotional, but I definitely teared up. And like, you're having those real conversations, those one-on-one moments of vulnerability. And I think that shows that you're human. And even, healthcare providers, looking at Dr. Gawande, other providers, like I think there's, doctors, yes, are held to a higher standard in society, but I think it's so important to remember that they are human too. And I don't know, it was just one of those moments of humanism. I was talking to this interviewer, this doctor, and I was just like, I think that showed how real this emotion was and how big of a deal this event, this failure was to me. And I think it just goes back to a question that I always like kind of have in the back of my head. It's how do you feel about yourself when you're by yourself? And I think that's a very good question to think about. And I asked that a lot to myself during the med school application process and talking about those failures and how vulnerable I had to be. And I think it's important in talking about those failures and thinking about them to look at them in the face and see where you can grow, see where you can improve, and I think that is an absolute example of what Dr. Gawande has done in this book. I think this book is an example of Dr. Gawande looking at because he talks a lot about his personal interactions with his patients, with his family, with different physicians who he was willing to ask those questions to, those palliative care specialists, hospice care, what questions should I be asking to better be in touch and maintain quality of life at the end of my patient's life, versus just, pushing to fix, and being vulnerable in that regard. And I think there's so much to be said for that and for being willing to ask those questions. And he wrote about his failures in the book itself and moments that he could have done better. And in that, I think that's where he grew, and that's where he pushed himself to, become a better physician, a better person, and look at all that he's accomplished. Like, he
Yeah.
is literally who I aspire to be, and continue to learn from. And yeah, so with all of that being said, like I said, I think Dr. Gwande is a perfect example of what it means to not only talk about your failures and realize them, but to look at them and be like, this is an opportunity for growth, and this is where I can only go up from here and improve what I'm doing to improve the lives of others.
Yeah, for sure. Well put.
All right, another question for you. As the author learns the limitations of being doctor informative, how did your perception of doctors and what you want from them change? What would you want from your doctor if you faced a serious illness?
So this part of the book was really cool to me because he talked about the some medical ethicists named Ezekiel and Linda Emanuel, and they were kind of the people that put this kind of verbiage to his book. This doctor informative. He had three different kind of doctors from this medical ethicist paper, and there was paternalistic, which was kind of like the classic kind of doctor that it's kind of the doctors knows best model, and they know, they have the knowledge, they have the experience, they'll tell you what's best for you, kind of. And he talked about how that's kind of denounced like these days, but it's still very common, especially in like critical situations and serious situations like this. A lot of doctors will kind of revert to that behavior. Then he talked about doctor informative, which it's kind of the opposite of paternalistic, where it's a lot of information, and they'll tell the patient all the information, and they'll kind of give you, so the red pill is this, the blue pill is this, and they'll leave the choice up to you completely. And he said that this is, while better than the paternalistic view, it still has its limitations, and those limitations kind of came when he was with his father, and they were talking. I believe that they're at a clinic in Boston. They had another appointment with a clinic in the Cleveland clinic, and the Boston clinic, the surgeon, he kind of gave the description. He was very doctor informative. He gave the red pill and the blue pill kind of options, and he said that with his father, who's a surgeon himself, it only increased his father's fears, and it like led to more questions and more anxiety and more kind of like uncertainty with which way he wanted to go. It was basically surgery or not surgery. And then he went to the Cleveland Clinic appointment shortly after that, near his hometown in Athens. And he said that doctor was a lot more like the third doctor of the medical ethicist paper, called Doctor Interpretive. And so this doctor will they'll ask the patient first, without bringing the red or blue pills into it. They'll ask the patient first, kind of saying, so what do you want? Like, what are your priorities kind of towards the end of life? And then they'll hear that from their patient, they'll get that response, and then they'll suggest the red or the blue pill, and kind of go have a conversation with the patient and saying, this is what the red pill will do for you. I think I say I think the blue pill might get you to your priorities more so than the red pill, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a mix, but it's definitely still suggestive and still like an open conversation. But they just kind of, with their expertise, they speak on what they think is best for you, um, while still keeping an open conversation. So that's kind of the touch on that. And he talked about the doctor informative and the limitations. I think for me, what I would want from my doctor is the doctor interpretive, like Dr. Gawande kind of implied, I guess. Someone that looks to me first to see what I want out of this experience, and then kind of from that he says what he thinks is the best way to get there. And obviously, as you said earlier, sometimes this isn't as easy as it might, kind of as it might seem, or like as it's not as easy as I can say it is. It might be a lot more complicated, but that is the ideal kind of way of going about it. And I think he summed it up best in this little quote on page 202. He said, "At some point, therefore, it becomes not only right, but necessary for a doctor to deliberate with people on their larger goals, to even challenge them to rethink ill-considered priorities and beliefs." And so I think with this, he's just kind of explaining or elaborating on the doctor interpretive, and just how doctor interpretive will kind of push you to really identify what your priorities are. And even if what you kind of thought was your priority, say 2 months ago, a lot of things can change in 2 months, especially with serious illness patients. And so with that, they want you to always kind of be reanalyzing your priorities in your life and stuff like that. So I think that's what I would want out of my doctor, just someone that is obviously open and friendly and everything, and wants the best for me, but also is someone that if they sense that maybe I'm down in the dumps about it, or maybe I'm like just kind of, maybe I'm overly positive, even like they're there to be home base for me, kind of, and like be the person that kind of sets the realistic expectations while also keeping a positive spin on it, I guess. And just giving me options, but also suggesting with their expertise, as I don't know as much as they do, obviously, about what they think is best for me and how to get to my priorities. So, all right. So now another question for you. Reading about Bill Thomas's Eden alternative in chapter 5, what came to mind when he outlined the 3 plagues of nursing home existence: boredom, loneliness, and helplessness? What do you think matters most when you envision elder care?
Okay, so I can speak to this a little bit from personal experience. So my grandma, she was in a nursing home as she right before, like basically the year before she passed away. And then also I worked as a CNA in a nursing home for just over 2 years. And so I will say that there were plenty, if not the majority of situations, that you did see those 3 things day in and day out in most cases, of the boredom, loneliness, and helplessness. And I'm not trying to completely diss nursing homes here, because I mean, in some cases it is the only option that people or families have for their loved ones. And I think staff really do try to make the best of it in combating those 3 kind of enemies of nursing homes, or elderly care in general. But I can talk about examples of residents that I've had who had no visitors, no family members who would come in and see them for weeks on end, if ever. Their schedule is very set. There's no, mealtime is 8 a.m., 12 noon, and then 5 p.m. for dinner, and, a snack here and there. It's, you wake up when the nursing staff is ready to get you up, and not only that, but your autonomy kind of goes out the window. Like if you were able to do anything by yourself, like, say you're able to get up, go to the bathroom, or get dressed on your own, it just takes you a while. And the nursing staff is obligated to, help you in those everyday tasks. Oftentimes what happens is that the nursing staff ends up doing that work for you just because it's quicker to help you, and they have other patients to go get to. Everything is so, a lot of times, short staffed, and like, you're on a time schedule, like you're trying to get things done. And so that completely takes away that resident's autonomy, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So to address the, like, what do you think matters most when you envision elder care? I think providing people and giving people a reason to continue living. I think that's really what it comes down to, a purpose of life, a meaning of life. And that obviously changes from person to person. Different things have different meanings to different people. And I think a perfect example from the book of where this was discussed was in Dr. Bill Thomas and the Eden Alternative, which is basically a nursing home experiment that he conducted at Chase Memorial Nursing Home. And I know this is Riley's one of the favorite parts of the book. It was mine too. It was just super interesting. But basically what this doctor did is he came into this nursing home and saw these 3 plagues, the boredom, loneliness, and helplessness. And he's like, I got to bring some life into this place. So what he did was literally that. He brought in birds, dogs, cats, plants, all of this stuff into the nursing home. And you wouldn't think, something as, I don't want to say simple of a change as that, but something like that would be something to have such a huge impact on the residents that were in this nursing home. But basically what they found is that people who were mute, who wouldn't talk, began talking. People who would never leave their rooms began leaving their rooms and interacting with other people. Death rates fell. All of these statistics are in the book, and it was very interesting to read about. But basically what it came down to is that the main takeaway of this entire study was that if you provide people with a reason to live, that's what it took. And we are able to provide people with a reason to live and a purpose. And a lot of that research also tied back to like giving people like a responsibility, something to care for, watering a plant, feeding a bird, an animal, something like that. For as small and simple as that is, it also gave people a sense of accomplishment and a sense of purpose. And I think that is so important. And in addition to that, I think the autonomy piece is another completely huge factor in, what is such an important piece that is kind of missing in elder care and in nursing homes. And with that, I will, of course, quote Atul. So 1 second here. And I love this. So one of my favorites. There are different concepts of autonomy. One is autonomy as free action, living completely independently, free of coercion and limitation. The kind of freedom is a common battle cry, but it is, as Bill Thomas came to realize on his homestead in upstate New York, a fantasy. He and his wife, Jude, had 2 children born with severe disabilities requiring lifelong care, and someday, illness, old age, or some other mishap will leave him in need of assistance too. Our lives are inherently dependent on others and subject to forces and circumstances well beyond our control. Having more freedom seems better than having less, but to what end? The amount of freedom you have in life is not the measure of the worth of your life. Just as safety is an empty and even self-defeating goal to live for, so ultimately is autonomy. The late, great philosopher Ronald Dworkin recognized that there is a second, more compelling sense of autonomy. Whatever the limits and travails we face, we want to retain the autonomy, the freedom to be the authors of our lives. This is the very marrow of being human. As Dworkin wrote in his remarkable 1986 essay on the subject, the value of autonomy lies in the scheme of responsibility it creates. Autonomy makes each of us responsible for shaping his own life according to some coherent and distinctive sense of character, conviction, and interest. It allows us to lead our own lives rather than be led along them, so that each of us can be, to the extent such a scheme of rights can make this possible, what he has made himself. All we ask is to be allowed to remain the writers of our own story. That story is ever changing. Over the course of our lives, we may encounter unimaginable difficulties. Our concerns and desires may shift, but whatever happens, we want to retain the freedom to shape our lives in ways consistent with our character and loyalties. So I know that was a lengthy one, but I think it just really hits home on the autonomy piece and how important it is. And, is such a very fine line because, where do safety and freedom and autonomy connect? Where should that line be drawn? There's obviously very big questions here, but I think, having a choice in maintaining quality of life and that choice and extent of freedom at the end of life is something that is so, so important. And I guess I did add a few extra notes here. So how do you arrive at this ideal situation of being at the end of your life and being satisfied, not having regrets, not being in an ICU where you don't want to be when you had declared or, had wished that you'd rather be home, at peace with your family and loved ones, something like that kind of a situation. And that all ties back to the healthcare decision day and having that conversation early on and having a plan as to if you did ever end up in a situation where you had to choose between X, Y, or Z, what path do you see yourself wanting? Obviously that answer might change over time, but it's always worth having, that conversation with your loved ones and your healthcare providers. And to quote, part of that conversation starts by, yourself asking, you these questions like, what are your fears? What are my fears? What are my fears if X were to happen or if Y were to happen? What trade-offs am I willing to or not willing to make to try to stop what is happening to me? In terms of quality of life after the treatment, after the procedure, I think that ties back to what Riley was saying earlier about, is the chemotherapy, if you're going to be sick in bed for the next 3 months and that could be your life expectancy, is that worth it if the chance of improvement or survival is so low? Or would you rather enjoy the life expectancy that you have left? It's those kind of questions that, are really the ones to be wrestled with. And again, like I know I mentioned this earlier, but is it worth sacrificing time now for possibly worse time later? And kind of to wrap up this whole discussion, like we mentioned, we're both going into medical school starting this summer, and there's a lot, like especially after reading all these books, especially after reading from Dr. Gawande, there's a lot that I want to keep in mind, especially as he said that, in the beginning of the book, right in the introduction, the very first sentence was that, we are not taught much about mortality in medical school. And clearly physicians deal with it a lot, especially depending on specialty, but, death is something that each and every one of us face. And I think it's something that should not be medicalized as much as it is. So with that, I do have a lot of things I want to remember and kind of walk the talk as a future physician, as a medical student. And I have a closing quote on that note. So.
Okay, while you find it, I just want to say something.
Yes.
So, I didn't even have this, I literally just wrote this down, but so like, even though, and like, so some of you might be saying like, why should I have this talk with my parents or my grandparents or myself, even though no one's really suffering from a serious illness right now? And I think that maybe that is a better opportunity than any time, because if someone were to have a serious illness, then that conversation becomes like really real. And that's when it becomes really hard. I think maybe now, while no one really has a serious illness, might be the best time just to kind of bring it up. And it doesn't have to be a really, like, it might get deep, but it doesn't have to be like a super deep conversation. It might just be like, so, I mean, let's say something were to happen, God forbid, like, what are your priorities at the end of your life? Like, and right now, it might be easier for them to answer than it might be down the road when they do get a serious illness for whatever reason it might be. So, I mean, to say that no one I know is suffering from a serious illness, or myself, like, might be a better time than ever. So just kind of take that, and I'll let Mads finish it off with whatever quote she's got dialed up. But and I'm sure it's a great one because it's Atul Gawande. But yeah, I just wanted to leave with that because I think and that like just inspired me. Like, I'm gonna definitely talk to my parents next week today. We're recording this beforehand, obviously, but just about like kind of just a little bit about their wishes, because a little bit is better than nothing, and I think that might go a long way. Who knows?
Amen. Okay, so this is a quick one.
Floor is yours.
We've been wrong about what our job is in medicine. We think our job is to ensure health and survival, but really it is larger than that. It is to enable well-being, and well-being is about the reasons one wishes to be alive. And that is on page 259 in the second paragraph of the epilogue. But yeah, so I know that was a lengthy discussion all in all, but I think that it's because it's about such an important topic, an important conversation that must be had and should be had, not just, from the prompting of the healthcare provider side, but within families. And, You know, little shout out to La Crosse, Wisconsin, and having such good statistics on, you know, low Medicare spending at end of life because they implemented a program at Gunderson Health System and having these advanced directive conversations. And that was some years back now, but it's paid off. And, you know, I don't want to say it's a simple thing to do because it's not, especially if there is, you know, pre-existing health conditions. But I completely agree with what Riley just said on, you know, it might be easier to have that conversation in times of peace and when things are going good, because you never know, a freak accident, something could happen the next day and you're faced with a decision on, you know, what to do. It's better to have those plans in place already versus, you know, guessing when you're maybe not able to communicate with your loved one. So with that, we really hope that you take advantage and read this book. It is definitely one of my favorites. It's probably my top 3. Yes, it's hard to, and that's a hard list to make. So I think we're saying a lot when we say that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I highly recommend it for everybody, not just people interested in the medical field, just like anyone, because we all, like Maddie said, like, I don't know, an hour ago by this point, like everyone dies. Like that's an accepted part of our lives is death. And none of us know what it's like. So why not make the most of it, kind of, and make the most of our last whatever time it is left, especially when dealing with a serious illness. And being ready for those moments before they happen is definitely key.
Amen. So thank you for joining us today, and stay tuned for more. I'm sure there will be plenty more book discussions to be had in the future. So we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yes.